Before we dive in, if you enjoy stories about family betrayal and ultimate justice, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. And if you want to support the channel, consider leaving a super thanks. Now, let me tell you about the day I signed my last will and testament and left my entire estate to the woman who lived next door instead of my own son. I sat in that lawyer's office with my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. My neighbor Margaret squeezed my other hand. The lawyer, a kind man named Donald Morrison, who had handled my affairs for 30 years, slid the documents across his mahogany desk. I looked at those pages one final time. Everything I had spent 73 years building, everything my late husband Robert and I had worked for, was about to go to someone who wasn't even related to me by blood. And I've never felt more at peace with a decision in my entire life. My name is Eleanor Patricia Whitmore, though most people just call me Ellie. I was born in 1952 in a small town in Ohio. I married Robert Whitmore when I was 23 years old. He was a good man who opened doors and remembered anniversaries. We weren't rich. Robert worked as a mechanical engineer, and I was an elementary school teacher. Together, we bought a modest 3-bedroom house in Columbus and started planning for the family we desperately wanted. Daniel arrived on March 14, 1977, 8 pounds, 6 ounces of pure miracle. I held him and made him a promise. I promised him every opportunity I never had. I promised him he would never want for anything. And God help me, I kept every single one of those promises. Robert and I poured everything into that boy. We bought a used piano even though it meant eating spaghetti and beans for 3 months. We paid $900 for science camp by taking tutoring jobs. Robert drove him to every soccer practice and game, some 4 hours away, sitting in aluminum bleachers in rain and snow. Daniel was brilliant. He graduated 3rd in his class with a 3.97 average. He chose Northwestern, one of the most expensive schools in the country. The scholarship covered 60%. We covered the rest, $40,000 a year for 4 years. We took out a second mortgage. I worked summer school every year. Robert picked up weekend shifts. We didn't take vacations. Every penny went to Daniel's education. He called every Sunday his freshman year. By sophomore year, every other Sunday. By junior year, once a month if we were lucky. He was busy with internships, projects, and a serious girlfriend named Vanessa, whose father owned a real estate development company. Daniel graduated summa cum laude in 2001. We drove 8 hours to the ceremony and cried watching him walk across that stage. He introduced us to Vanessa, beautiful, polished, expensive, diamond studs, designer handbag, smile that didn't reach her eyes. They had reservations with Vanessa's family, but we could do breakfast the next morning. They never showed up. Daniel called at noon. Something had come up. Vanessa's father wanted to introduce him to business contacts. We drove home that afternoon. Robert was quiet the whole drive. I saw disappointment in his eyes, the first crack in our belief that our son would always be our son. Daniel moved to New York City, starting salary $90,000 a year, more than Robert and I made combined after 30 years. He sent us a card at Christmas, just a card, no visit, no phone call. It arrived December 29th. Robert had his first heart attack in February of 2003. He was 60 years old. Triple bypass surgery. They cracked his chest open and rerouted his arteries. I took leave to care for him. We couldn't afford it, but I had no choice. I called Daniel the night of the heart attack, voicemail. I called the next day, voicemail again. I sent an email. 3 days later, I got a text. Sorry to hear about Dad, swamped at work. We'll call soon. He didn't call. He didn't visit. Robert spent 8 weeks recovering and his son never came to see him, not once. I made excuses to Robert. Daniel was building his career. We had raised him to be independent. Robert just nodded. But I saw it in his face, the knowing. We had lost our son to a world we could never be part of. Robert died in August of 2007 from a second massive heart attack. He was in the garden fixing the fence. I heard a crash and knew. I ran outside. He was on the ground, clutching his chest, face gray. I called 911, did CPR. Begged him not to leave. He died in the ambulance. He was 64 years old. I called Daniel from the hospital. He answered on the 5th ring. Distracted, hurried. I told him his father had died. Silence. Then, "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry." I heard voices in the background, someone laughing. He said he was at a work event but would call back in an hour. He called back 6 hours later. I'd been sitting alone in our kitchen, staring at Robert's empty chair for 6 hours. Daniel came to the funeral, flew in the morning of the service, flew back out that evening. He brought Vanessa. They had gotten married the year before, small wedding in the Hamptons. We weren't invited. Daniel said it was just immediate family. Vanessa wore a black dress that probably cost more than my car. She kept checking her phone during the service. After the funeral, Daniel pulled me aside. Practical matters, life insurance, the house, retirement accounts. Did Robert leave a will? Everything was left to me. He looked relieved. Then he said if I ever needed help managing anything, he was happy to advise me. He worked in finance after all. I thanked him. They left right after. Brief hug. Vanessa air-kissed my cheek. Daniel said he would call soon. I stood in my driveway watching their rental car disappear. Margaret from next door had been, organizing everything all day. She had sat with me at the hospital until Daniel arrived. She had held my hand during the service when I cried. She was a widow herself. Her husband had died of cancer 3 years earlier. She understood loss in a way Daniel never could. Daniel called 2 weeks later, asked how I was doing. I said, managing. Then he suggested I might want to consider selling the house, too big for just me. I was getting older. He could help me find a good real estate agent. I told him I wasn't ready. He said, of course, no rush, just something to consider. He didn't call again for 3 months. I stayed in the house. Got a part-time job at the library because the pension and Robert's life insurance weren't quite enough. I did my own yard work, fixed things that broke, learned to replace faucets and unclog drains. I managed, I survived. Margaret and I became close. She was 70, 3 years older than me. She had 2 sons in California who visited twice a year, called every Sunday, sent care packages. She showed me pictures of 5 grandchildren. She talked about them with such joy. I listened and felt a hollow, aching emptiness where my family joy should have been. Margaret and I had dinner together most nights. We watched Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, played cards, went to the grocery store every Thursday. She was there for my 68th birthday with homemade chocolate cake. She was there when I had the flu, bringing soup and sitting with me. She was there in ways my own son had never been there. Daniel called on holidays, Christmas, Easter, my birthday sometimes, 5 minutes, 10 at most. How are you? I'm fine. Work is busy. Vanessa is well. Thinking about you. Love you. Goodbye. I asked when he might visit. He said soon. Really busy with work, traveling a lot. Ohio was just so far. He promised he would try. He never did. The years passed. 2008, 2009, 2010. My hair went completely white. I developed arthritis. I started using a cane after slipping on ice. Margaret found me, called the ambulance, stayed while they x-rayed my hip, brought me home, checked on me every hour that night. I called Daniel the next day. He said that sounded scary and he was glad I was okay. Then he suggested I should really think about moving somewhere safer. He didn't offer to come help, just suggested I move. In 2012, I fell ill. Pneumonia. I woke up unable to breathe. Margaret heard me coughing through the walls. She found me struggling to get out of bed, called 911. I spent a week in the hospital. Margaret visited every single day, brought books and magazines, talked to doctors, became my advocate. I called Daniel from the hospital, left a message, called again the next day. Voicemail. Sent an email. 2 days later, a text. Sorry, Mom, traveling for work in Singapore. Back next week. Hope you feel better. Traveling in Singapore while his mother was in the hospital with pneumonia. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I deleted it. I decided I was done reaching out. If my son wanted a relationship, he would have to initiate it. He didn't. 7 months of silence. Then, Christmas Day, 2012. Merry Christmas, Mom. How are you? I'm fine. Work is crazy. Vanessa says hi. We're in Aspen. Great skiing. Hope you're staying warm. Lots of love. Talk soon. He hung up before I could tell him I had been in the hospital. Before I could tell him I had nearly died. I started to understand something. My son didn't love me. Not really. Or maybe he did in some abstract way, like old furniture taking up space. He didn't hate me. He simply didn't think about me at all unless reminded. And even when reminded, he gave me the bare minimum required to check the box marked good son. I grieved. I grieved for the relationship I thought we had. I grieved for the little boy who had hugged my neck and told me I was the best mommy in the world. I grieved for the son I had imagined I would have, the one who would be there in my old age. Margaret helped me through this grief without knowing what she was helping me through. She was just there, every day. She saved my life during that dark period. In 2013, I turned 71 years old. Margaret threw me a small party, just us and a few women from church. They gave me a beautiful shawl they had all chipped in to buy. These women, not related to me, who owed me nothing, had pooled their resources to give me something meaningful. My son sent a card 4 days after my birthday. Generic, pre-printed message, his signature, no phone call. That summer, I made a decision. I called Donald Morrison. I wanted to update my will. I made an appointment for the following week. I sat in Donald's office and told him I wanted to leave my entire estate to Margaret Sullivan. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked, "What about Daniel?" I said Daniel has made it very clear through his actions that he doesn't need me or anything I have to offer. Daniel's a wealthy man living a wealthy life. Margaret has been more of a family to me than my own son has been in over a decade. This is what I want. Donald was quiet. He had to ask, was I sure? Was I certain? This was significant. Family relationships were complicated. Maybe Daniel was just busy. Maybe he would change. Maybe I would regret this. I looked Donald in the eyes and said I had never been more certain of anything. Margaret earned this through her actions. Daniel forfeited it through his neglect. This was justice, not revenge. We spent 2 hours drafting the new will. Everything would go to Margaret: the house, the modest savings, the stocks and bonds, my mother's jewelry, the car, everything. Daniel would receive nothing except a letter explaining my decision. Donald suggested I include a small bequest to Daniel, maybe $10,000, to make it clear I was of sound mind. I said no, not a penny. He gets nothing. He earned nothing. I signed the will. It was witnessed and notarized. I walked out feeling lighter than I had felt in years. I had taken control. I had made a decision based on truth rather than fantasy. It felt right. It felt clean. It felt like the most honest thing I had done in my entire life. I didn't tell Margaret. This was my decision, my gift, my way of acknowledging what she meant to me. She would find out when the time came. Life continued. 2014, 2015. Daniel called on holidays. The conversations never changed, never deepened, never became real. I stopped asking when he would visit. I stopped sharing anything meaningful. I gave him the same surface-level responses he gave me. Yes, I'm fine. Health is good. Weather is nice. Fine. Always fine. The most meaningless word in the English language. In April of 2016, I found a lump in my breast. Mammogram, ultrasound, biopsy. 2 weeks of not knowing if I had cancer. Margaret went with me to every appointment, held my hand during the biopsy. Was there? The lump was benign. Just a cyst. I cried when the doctor told me. Not just because I wasn't dying, but because I realized how alone I had been during those 2 weeks of fear. I hadn't even told Daniel. What would have been the point? That night, I decided I was done waiting for Daniel to be the son I wanted him to be. Done hoping he would suddenly realize he had a mother who loved him and needed him. From that moment forward, I would treat Daniel exactly as he treated me. Surface level, perfunctory, distant. If he wanted more, he would have to work for it. In November of 2017, I decided I needed to see my son one more time. I needed to look him in the eyes, ask him directly if he loved me, if I mattered to him. I needed to hear it from his mouth. I called Daniel on a Tuesday evening. He answered distracted. I said, "Daniel, I need you to visit me." Pause. Then, Yeah, Mom, I really want to do that. It's just been so crazy. Maybe in a few months. I said, no, not in a few months. Now. I need you to visit me now. I heard him sigh. That sigh told me everything. I was an inconvenience, a chore. He asked if I was sick. I said, I'm 75 years old, Daniel. I'm not sick, but I'm not going to live forever. I would like to see my son before I die. Is that really too much to ask? Another pause. Then, Mom, don't be dramatic. You're not dying. You're fine. I just saw you at Christmas. I wanted to scream. He hadn't seen me at Christmas. He had called me for 7 minutes. He hadn't physically seen me in person for over 10 years. I said, will you come visit me or not? He said he was slammed at work. Huge merger. Can't just drop everything. Maybe in March. I'll try. March was 4 months away. I said, okay, Daniel, you try. You try to find time for your mother in your very busy schedule. I hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand and felt something shift inside me, like a door closing, a final door. The last bit of hope I had been clutching died in that moment, the death of my relationship with my son. Margaret came over an hour later. She took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I told her everything, the years of neglect, the missed visits, the perfunctory phone calls, asking him to visit and being told he was too busy. I cried. Margaret listened. Then she said, I'm so sorry, Ellie. You deserve better. We sat at my kitchen table until midnight. She told me about her grateful sons who never made her feel like a burden. She said, you have me. I know I'm not your family by blood, but I'm your family by choice, and choice matters more. I cried again, but this time it was relief, gratitude. I wasn't alone. March came and went. Daniel didn't visit, didn't call to explain, simply didn't mention it, as if the conversation had never happened. I didn't bring it up either. I was done. Completely done. In June of 2018, the Hendersons sold their house. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, Brian and Melissa Cooper. Their daughter was 8 months old, named Emma. They were friendly, polite. A week later, Melissa knocked on my door holding Emma. She looked exhausted, asked if I might watch Emma for an hour. Babysitter canceled and Brian was at work and she was desperate. She offered to pay me. I looked at that baby and something in my heart cracked open. I said, of course, no payment necessary. That hour turned into a regular arrangement, 3 mornings a week. Suddenly, I had a baby in my life again, tiny hands grabbing my fingers, giggles and babbling and baby shampoo. Emma became the grandchild I had never had. Melissa paid me $50 per morning, $150 a week, $600 a month. It helped fix the leaking roof and replace the water heater. In September, I called Daniel on his birthday. He was 41 years old. I told him about Emma. I told him I was watching my neighbor's baby 3 times a week. It brought me so much joy. Made me think about being a grandmother. Long silence. Then Daniel said, "That's nice, Mom. That's really nice for you." His voice was flat, disinterested. He had to go. They were heading to dinner. "Happy birthday to you too," he said, even though it wasn't my birthday. That was when I decided to test something. I decided to see what would happen if I stopped initiating contact. I wanted to see if Daniel would notice, if he would reach out. I didn't call him on Thanksgiving, didn't call on Christmas, didn't send a card for New Year's, and you know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Daniel didn't call to check on me, didn't send a worried email. Our relationship had been sustained entirely by my effort. The moment I stopped trying, it ceased to exist. In January of 2019, Margaret asked if I had heard from Daniel over the holidays. I said no. She asked if I had reached out. I said no. She said, "So he didn't even check on you, not once." I shook my head. She took my hand. She said, "Ellie, you know what you need to do." I said I had already changed my will. She said, "That's good, but you need to tell him. While you're still alive, he needs to understand consequences." I said no. "He'll find out when I'm gone. That's when it will matter." Margaret looked at me with respect. She said, "You're stronger than I gave you credit for." Life continued. I had Emma 3 days a week, Margaret every day. My library job and church and friends. I was busy, useful, needed, just not by my son. In March of 2019, I had a small stroke, a TIA. I was at the grocery store with Margaret. Suddenly couldn't remember where I was, couldn't speak properly. Margaret saw it immediately, got me to sit, called 911, rode in the ambulance. The doctor said I was lucky, no permanent damage. But it was a warning. They put me on blood thinners, told me to make sure I had someone who could check on me. I told them I had Margaret. I spent 3 days in the hospital. Margaret was there every day. Melissa came with Emma. Women from church sent flowers. Library co-workers sent a fruit basket. My phone rang constantly with concerned friends. Daniel never called, not once. When I got home, I did one final test. I called Daniel's number. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Daniel, this is your mother. I had a stroke. I'm home from the hospital now. I'm okay, but I wanted you to know. Please call me. I waited. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, nothing. On the 4th day, a text. Sorry to hear that, Mom. Glad you're okay. Things are crazy here. We'll call soon. 19 words, that's what his mother having a stroke warranted. I showed Margaret the text. Shock, anger, disgust. She said, "This is unacceptable. This is cruelty." I said, "I know." She asked if I was going to respond. I said, "No." "What's the point? He clearly doesn't care." She nodded. Then she said, "When are you going to tell him about the will?" I said, "Never. He'll find out when it's too late." Margaret smiled. A satisfied smile that said, justice is coming and he deserves it. I recovered. Life returned to normal. Emma was walking now, toddling around my living room. I continued my routines, a life that didn't include my son except as a ghost. In July of 2019, Daniel called me. Random Tuesday. He had news, big news. He and Vanessa were finally ready to start trying for a baby. He was so excited. I could hear it, actual emotion, just not for me. He talked for 20 minutes about their plans, the 5-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, the nursery designer, the private school they were already looking into, how he couldn't wait to be a dad. I listened, made appropriate sounds, said congratulations. When he finally stopped talking, he said, "You're going to be a grandmother, Mom. Isn't that exciting?" I said, "Yes, it's wonderful." Then he said they would have to bring the baby to visit sometime, maybe when he or she was older. Flying with an infant is so difficult, maybe when the kid is 2 or 3. I said that would be nice. Then I said, "Daniel, you do realize I'll be 79 or 80 years old by then?" He said, "Yeah, I guess so. Don't worry, you're in great health. You'll be around." He had to go. Dinner reservation. I sat in my kitchen and felt nothing but cold clarity. My son hadn't visited me in over 12 years, but now he was planning to maybe bring his future child to see me in 3 years, if it was convenient, and I was supposed to be grateful. That night, I told Margaret about the call. She listened. Then she said, "Ellie, you need to cut him out entirely. Right now. Send him a letter. Tell him exactly how you feel. Make it clear he is no longer your son. You are no longer his mother. Do it now, while you're healthy and clear-headed." I thought about it. Then I said, "You're right. I'm going to do it." I spent 3 days writing that letter. I wanted every word to count, draft after draft. The final version was 3 pages long, single-spaced, typed. It started like this. "Dear Daniel, I'm writing this letter because a phone conversation would give you the opportunity to interrupt, deflect, or make excuses, and I need you to hear all of this. You called me recently to tell me you and Vanessa are planning to have a baby. You said I would be a grandmother. You suggested you might bring the child to visit me in 2 or 3 years. That phone call clarified something I've been struggling to accept for many years. You are not my son anymore. Not in any meaningful sense. I detailed everything, the missed visits, the perfunctory phone calls, Robert's death and Daniel's absence, my hospital stays and his indifference, the years of begging for scraps of attention, the moment I stopped calling and he disappeared, the stroke that warranted 19 words in a text, all of it, 3 pages of facts, then the conclusion. Because of these facts, I have made certain decisions about my future and my estate. You will not inherit anything from me. Everything I have will go to people who have actually been present in my life. I am not writing this to hurt you or change you. I am writing this to inform you of reality. When I die, you will receive a letter from my attorney with the details. Until then, I do not wish to hear from you. Do not call me. Do not visit me. Do not send cards or gifts. You have spent 12 years making it clear I am not important to you. I am now making it clear you are not important to me. I wish you well. I hope you are a better father to your child than you have been a son to me. Goodbye, Daniel. I signed it, put it in an envelope, walked to the post office and mailed it certified mail. Signature required. I wanted proof he received it. The postal receipt said 3 days. I went home and waited. 4 days later, my phone rang. Daniel's number. I didn't answer. He called 3 times. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Shocked, angry, confused. He said we needed to talk. I was being irrational. He didn't understand where this was coming from. He had always loved me. Work was demanding and he was sorry he hadn't visited, but that didn't mean he didn't care. I couldn't just disinherit him. The letter was hurtful and unfair. He was calling his lawyer. I needed to call him back immediately. I deleted the voicemail. He called every day for a week. I never answered. He sent emails, long emails, angry, then pleading. He said I was being manipulated, asked if Margaret had put me up to this. He would come visit. We could talk this through. I was his mother and he loved me. This was all a misunderstanding. Things would be different. He would call more, visit more. He promised. I deleted every email without responding. Margaret asked how I felt. I said I felt free, lighter. I had spoken my truth. What Daniel did with that was his problem. She hugged me, said she was proud of me. The calls and emails stopped after 2 weeks. Blessed, peaceful silence. I went back to my life, to Emma and Margaret and my routines. I didn't think about Daniel. When I did, it was without emotion. I had a son once. I don't anymore. Simple as that. In October of 2019, Margaret had a mild heart attack. Her sons flew in immediately from California, both of them. Stayed 2 weeks, took her to appointments, researched doctors, interviewed home health aides, arranged for a medical alert system. That's what real children do. I helped as much as I could. Her sons thanked me, said they were grateful their mother had such a good friend. I didn't tell them I was the one who should be grateful. Margaret recovered. We celebrated Thanksgiving together, just the two of us. We said what we were grateful for. I said I was grateful for her, for Emma, for my health, for my life. I didn't mention Daniel. He was no longer part of my gratitude. Christmas came and went. No card from Daniel, no call, nothing. I didn't send anything either. The break was complete. I felt nothing about it. No regret, no sadness, just acceptance. 2020 began with hope. Then March happened, the pandemic, lockdowns. Suddenly I was trapped in my house, terrified of a virus that seemed especially dangerous for someone my age. Margaret and I couldn't see each other. We talked on the phone multiple times a day, but it wasn't the same. I couldn't watch Emma. The isolation was crushing. I thought about dying alone in a hospital, family unable to visit. I thought about Daniel, how even a global pandemic wasn't enough to make him check on his 78-year-old mother. Margaret and I started meeting outside in my backyard when the weather was nice, 6 feet apart, masked. It wasn't the same, but it was something. She said I should call Daniel, just to hear his voice. I said no. I had meant what I said in that letter. If I died tomorrow, he would find out from the lawyer. Vaccines came. In early 2021, I got mine as soon as eligible. Margaret got hers. We waited 2 weeks for full immunity. Then, finally, we hugged. For the first time in over a year. We both cried. It felt like coming back to life. Life slowly returned to normal. I started watching Emma again. She was 3 years old now, talking in full sentences. She called me Grandma Ellie. Her mother hadn't told her to. She just started doing it on her own. Every time she said it, my heart felt full. In June of 2021, I turned 79 years old. Margaret threw me a party in her backyard. Small gathering, a few friends and Melissa and Brian and Emma. Emma gave me a drawing of the two of us holding hands. I cried. I hung that drawing on my refrigerator where I could see it every day. That night, alone, I thought about the fact that Daniel hadn't acknowledged my birthday. No card, no call, nothing. He had honored my request not to contact me, or he was relieved to have an excuse not to bother. Either way, I was 79, and my son had been absent for 2 years without checking if I was still alive. That told me everything about my decision. I had made the right choice. In March of 2022, I went back to see Donald Morrison. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. Donald asked if anything had changed with Daniel. Did I want to reconsider? I said Daniel has not spoken to me in 3 years. He doesn't know if I'm alive or dead. He doesn't care. Nothing has changed except my certainty. Donald said we should add language to make the will ironclad. Make it clear I was of sound mind, and Daniel's disinheritance was deliberate. Make it impossible to challenge. I said do whatever needs to be done. We spent that afternoon going over every detail. My house was worth approximately $350,000. My savings about $80,000. Some stocks worth maybe $40,000. In total, my estate was worth roughly $470,000. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough to change Margaret's life. Enough to make Daniel very angry when he found out. Donald drafted the updated will with a statement explaining my decision. I am deliberately excluding my son, Daniel Robert Whitmore, from any inheritance. This is not due to mental incapacity, but a considered decision based on his consistent absence from my life over many years. He has not visited me, called me, or shown any interest in my well-being. Meanwhile, Margaret Ann Sullivan has been a constant source of support, companionship, and care. She has been more of a family to me than my own son. It is my wish that everything I own go to her, as she has earned it through her kindness and dedication. I am of sound mind, and make this decision freely and deliberately. I signed the new will. It was witnessed by 2 paralegals who didn't know me. It was done. Again. 10 years of the same decision. 10 years of documentation. I walked out knowing my affairs were in order, knowing justice would be served. In February of 2023, I started having chest pains. Nothing dramatic, just tightness, pressure. I ignored it for days, thinking it was indigestion, but it persisted. Margaret noticed me wincing during dinner. She insisted I call my doctor. They wanted to see me immediately. EKG, cardiologist, more tests. The diagnosis came quickly. Significant blockages, narrowing arteries. I needed surgery. Stent placement at minimum, possibly another bypass. Soon. The blockages were dangerous. I could have a major heart attack at any time. I was admitted to the hospital on March 1st. Procedure scheduled for March 3rd. Margaret wanted to be there. I said of course. She was the only family I had. The procedure went well. 2 stents. I would need medication for life. I would need to be careful, but I would be okay. I spent 3 days recovering. Margaret stayed with me the entire time, slept in the chair by my bed. Was there. On the 3rd day, while lying in that hospital bed feeling grateful, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at that name for a long moment. Then I handed the phone to Margaret. I said, answer it. Tell him I'm in the hospital. Tell him about the surgery. Let's see what he does. Margaret looked at me with wide eyes. She said, are you sure? I said, I'm sure. I want to see how he reacts. I want confirmation. Margaret answered. She said, hello, this is Margaret Sullivan, Eleanor's friend. Pause. Then, yes, I'm her neighbor. Eleanor's right here, but she can't talk right now. She just had heart surgery and she's recovering. Another pause. Then Margaret's face hardened. She said, excuse me. Then, no, I don't think that's appropriate. I'm going to hang up now. And she did. She hung up on my son. I asked what he said. Margaret looked at me with disgust. She said he asked if I was the one who had manipulated you into changing your will. He said he knew what I was trying to do. He said he was going to make sure I didn't steal his inheritance. He would fight this in court. He was calling his lawyer. Then she said the worst part. I asked if he was concerned about his mother's health, about whether you survived surgery, and he said of course he was concerned, but he needed to address the will situation because it was clearly elder abuse. Margaret looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said, Ellie, He's not even a person. He's just a shell where a person should be. I felt nothing. I'd suspected this would be his reaction, but hearing it confirmed was still shocking. He had called not to check on his mother, but to accuse my friend of manipulation and threaten legal action. That was his priority. Money, inheritance, what he believed he was entitled to simply because he existed. I told Margaret what we needed to do. We needed to go see Donald Morrison one more time, document everything, the phone call, Daniel's accusations, his complete lack of concern for my health, make absolutely certain the will was unbreakable. Margaret said we should wait until I was stronger. I said no. We do this now, while everything is fresh, while I'm in the hospital and can prove my medical condition. Donald came to the hospital. He brought his laptop and portable printer. He interviewed me extensively, my mental state, my decision-making capacity, my relationship with Daniel and Margaret, the phone call. He took notes, recorded the conversation with my permission. Then, he drafted an addendum to the will, another statement of intentions, another layer of protection. I signed it right there in the hospital bed. 2 nurses witnessed it. A notary came to the hospital. It was as legally sound as any document could be. I was released on March 6th. Margaret stayed with me for the next week, making sure I took medications, making sure I ate properly, making sure I didn't overexert myself. She was my nurse, my companion, my daughter in all the ways that mattered. I recovered slowly. My heart was healing, but something else was healing too. The last little bit of doubt I had harbored, that was gone now. Completely gone. He had shown me exactly who he was. I believed him. In April, Daniel sent a letter, not to me, to Donald Morrison, from his lawyer. It accused me of being mentally incompetent, accused Margaret of undue influence, demanded that my will be declared invalid and Daniel reinstated as beneficiary, threatened litigation. Donald called and read me the letter. He asked how I wanted to respond. I said we ignore it. Daniel can threaten all he wants. The will is ironclad. When I die, he can challenge it and he will lose. Donald agreed. The documentation was extensive, medical records showing my sound mind, multiple witnesses, clear and consistent statements over many years. Daniel had no case. He was bluffing. The months passed. I lived my life. I watched Emma grow, spent my days with Margaret, attended church, volunteered at the library. I was happy, genuinely happy. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt at peace. In September of 2023, I started thinking about the future, about what would happen after I died, about how Daniel would react. Part of me felt satisfaction. He deserved to feel consequences. But another part felt sad. Not sad for him. Sad for the relationship we could have had. Sad for all the wasted possibility. I talked to Margaret about this. We were sitting in my backyard watching the sunset. I said I felt like I should write another letter to Daniel, not to send now, but to be delivered with the will after I die. A final explanation, a final goodbye. Margaret said I didn't owe him that. I said I knew, but I wanted to do it for me, for closure. I spent weeks on that letter. This one was different, gentler, sadder, more reflective. It started. Daniel, if you are reading this, I have died. I'm sorry you had to find out from a lawyer. I'm sorry for many things, but I'm not sorry for the decision I made about my estate. Let me explain why. I told him everything I had felt over the years, the loneliness of being forgotten, the pain of being treated like an obligation, the slow realization that he didn't love me, not really, the acceptance that I had to let go of the son I thought I had. I told him about Margaret, about how she had been there for every hospital stay, every health scare, every ordinary day, about Emma and the joy she brought me, about the life I had built without him, a good life. I told him I hoped he was happy, successful, a good father if he had become one. I told him I didn't hate him. I just didn't need him anymore. And I told him that Margaret deserved everything because she had earned it through presence and care and love, things he had never given me. I signed that letter, put it in an envelope, Gave it to Donald with instructions to deliver it to Daniel after my death. Donald said it was a beautiful letter, painful but fair. He would make sure Daniel received it. That brings us to October of 2023, to just a few weeks ago, to the moment that led to me sitting in Donald's office with Margaret by my side. Let me tell you what happened. I had another health scare, worse than before. I collapsed in my kitchen. Margaret heard the crash through the walls. She has keys for emergencies. She let herself in and found me on the floor, conscious but confused. Didn't know where I was, couldn't move my right side very well. Margaret knew immediately. Another stroke, bigger than the TIA. She called 911, stayed with me, talked to me, keeping me conscious. The ambulance came. Margaret followed in her car. This stroke was more serious. I spent a week in the hospital. So many tests, MRI, CT scan, blood work, neurological exams, significant ischemic stroke, some damage. My right side was weaker, speech slightly slurred, memory had gaps. But I was alive, still me, still capable of making decisions, still of sound mind even if my body wasn't quite as sound. The doctor said I needed to make arrangements, long-term care, medical power of attorney, end-of-life decisions. They said it gently, but the message was clear. I was 81 years old, multiple strokes and heart problems, living on borrowed time. I needed to get my affairs in order. I told them my affairs were already in order, but I would make sure everything was documented properly. Margaret stayed with me throughout that week, talked to doctors, asked questions, took notes. And when I was alone late at night, unable to sleep, afraid of having another stroke and not waking up, she sat beside my bed and held my hand. She said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." And I believed her, because she had proven it, over and over. On the 6th day, I told Margaret I wanted to see Donald one more time. I wanted to update my medical power of attorney to name her instead of Daniel. Make sure she would be the one making decisions if I couldn't. Margaret said Daniel was still technically listed. I said, I know. We need to change that. She earned this responsibility. Daniel forfeited it. Donald came to the hospital. We did all the paperwork. Medical power of attorney transferred to Margaret, healthcare proxy, DNR orders, all of it. I made every decision clearly with doctors present to attest to my mental capacity. I signed everything. Margaret signed everything. When I left the hospital, Margaret would be my legal guardian in all medical matters. Daniel had no say, no power, no role, completely cut out, just as he deserved. That's when I decided to go one step further, redo the will one final time. Not to change the substance. Margaret was still getting everything, but to add one more layer of protection, one more statement of intentions, one more piece of documentation proving this was my decision, made freely and clearly and repeatedly over many years. So I asked Donald to bring the will to the hospital, to let me sign it again in front of doctors and nurses and anyone else who could testify I was of sound mind, to create an unbreakable record. That's why, on October 4th, 2023, I sat in Donald Morrison's office 1 week after being released from the hospital. Margaret sat beside me, held my hand. Donald slid the will across his desk. Same will I had signed in 2022. Same will I had first created in 2013. 10 years of the same decision, 10 years of documentation. I picked up the pen with my shaky hand. I looked at Margaret and she smiled. She said, "You don't have to do this if you're not sure." I said, "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life." And I signed. One final time. The last signature I would ever put on a legal document. The last act of control over my life and my legacy. Donald witnessed it. His secretary witnessed it. A notary notarized it. It was done. After all the years of pain and disappointment and neglect, I had made sure that justice would be served, that the person who deserved my estate would get it, that my son would learn consequences, that love and care and presence would be rewarded, that absence would be punished. We went back to my house after that meeting. Margaret made tea. We sat in my kitchen, the kitchen where I had raised Daniel, where I had made countless meals for him, where I had cried over his absence. I looked at Margaret and said, "Thank you. Thank you for being my family when my own family abandoned me. Thank you for loving me when love was scarce. Thank you for proving that family is about choice, not blood." She cried. I cried. We held each other and cried for everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm telling you this story now because I want you to understand something. I didn't disinherit my son out of spite or revenge. I disinherited him because he disinherited me first. Every missed visit was him disinheriting me. Every perfunctory phone call, every time he chose his career over his mother, his convenience over my needs, his life over our relationship. I simply made legal what he had already made real. I also want you to understand, this story isn't really about Daniel. It's about Margaret, about Emma, about the women from church and neighbors who checked on me and people who showed up when showing up mattered. It's about chosen family, about how love is proven through action, not words, about how presence is what matters. Everything else is just noise. I don't know how much longer I have. Could be days, could be years, but however much time I have left, I will spend it with people who actually want to be with me, people who have proven their love, people who have earned their place in my life. And when I die, my estate will go to the person who deserves it, not the person who shares my DNA, but the person who was there, the person who cared, the person who loved me not because she had to, but because she chose to. Daniel will find out when I'm gone. He'll get the letter, the notification from the lawyer. He'll discover he has been cut out completely. He will probably be angry, try to contest the will, claim I was manipulated or incompetent, and he will lose because there are 10 years of documentation, 10 years of statements, 10 years of witnesses, 10 years of medical records proving my sound mind. He will lose because I made sure he would lose. Part of me wishes I could see his face when he finds out. Part of me wants to witness that moment of realization, the moment he understands that his neglect had consequences, that his absence cost him something real, that he can't inherit my love and my life and my possessions without ever having earned them. But I won't see that moment. I'll be dead. And maybe that's better. Maybe it's enough to know that justice will be served, that the right person will benefit, that my life and my choices will mean something even after I'm gone. If you're listening to my story, I want you to think about your own life, your own relationships, who you show up for and who shows up for you. Don't wait until it's too late to appreciate the people who love you. Don't take for granted the people who are present. And if you're like Daniel, if you've been neglecting someone who loves you because you're too busy or too important, change now. Call them, visit them, show them they matter before it's too late, before they stop waiting, before they realize they're better off without you. I lived for 81 years, raised a son, buried a husband, survived strokes and heart problems in a pandemic, built a life, and in the end, the person who mattered most wasn't the person I gave birth to. It was the person who chose to stand beside me. That's the lesson. Choose the people who choose you. Love the people who love you, and don't waste your time on people who have made it clear you're not a priority. Life is too short, way too short. I'm at peace with my decision, with my life, with how this story ends. Margaret will inherit my house and savings and everything I own. She will be taken care of. She will know she mattered. She will have proof that her kindness and care and love were worth something. And Daniel will learn that actions have consequences, that neglect has costs, that you can't ignore someone for years and then expect to benefit from their death. That inheritance isn't a right. It's something you earn. That's my story. That's why I left everything to my neighbor instead of my son. Because she was there and he wasn't. Because she cared and he didn't. Because she earned it and he didn't. Simple as that. Justice served. Consequences delivered. Peace achieved. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you've experienced something similar. Tell me if you think I made the right decision. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to support the channel, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories, and consider leaving a super thanks. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for understanding. Now go call your mother or your father or whoever has been waiting to hear from you. Don't be like Daniel. Be better. Be present. Be there. Because someday it will be too late and you'll have to live with that forever.